Hello. Music doesn't really exist. At least not in the way you think it does. Because all music really is, at its core, is time. Of course, one main component of music which is based in time is rhythm, obviously. Most music bases itself on a time frame where different instruments all play on a given beat at a certain tempo. Of course, some music doesn't have any rhythm, it's arrhythmic and doesn't adhere to any sort of time-based structure. However, most music, especially music in the Western world, adheres to a traditional steady beat of rhythm and tempo. The less obvious case where music presents itself as time is the sound of music, the tone. Music is based in harmonies and melodies, which are constituted by tones produced from some sort of instrument. Most instruments produce a tone in the exact same way, by harnessing the emission of sound waves from some sort of vibrating element. Be it a piece of paper, an elastic band, a ruler, or more commonly a metal string like that found on a guitar. When you pluck the string of a guitar, it sets the string in motion, vibrating back and forth, displacing the air molecules around it. If we zoom in closer, we see that the air molecules are pushed by the string, creating waves of empty spaces of fewer air molecules and a space with more molecules. The position of these air molecules won't stay the same though. The molecules displaced into the denser area will want to return to its original position as each molecule is pressing against each other. Air has a certain degree of elasticity, like an elastic band, wanting to be returned to its original state after being deformed. The area of molecules soon occupy the area of fewer molecules, however not before the entire process continues to the molecules in the surrounding area in a wave-like fashion as energy is transferred through the air before soon dissipating due to friction. It's important to note that the air molecules themselves don't actually travel. Rather, it's the energy that's transferring through the air molecules that travels. This process of the air molecules pushing the guitar string back and forth occurs hundreds or even thousands of times per second. Otherwise known as frequency, describes exactly that, how many times something happens per second. The sound waves produced by the guitar string travel into the ear, where it's converted from acoustic energy into electrical energy in the form of nerve impulses by the organ called the cochlea, which kind of looks like a snail. The nerve impulses, which represent acoustic energy, travel to the brain. But why does this create a tone? The reason it does so is because it's simply how our brain interprets it. Our brain receives the message that the cochlea is sending, that it's receiving a sound wave of 440 Hz. But that tone is simply a sensory representation of the frequency, and all that really defines that sensory representation is how fast the sound waves that travel to the ear goes through periods of empty and dense spaces of air molecules. You could therefore argue that a tone doesn't really exist. The qualities of a tone isn't something we can place into a vat to prod at and study. It's simply a perceptual representation of the frequency or time of sound waves. Do anything that involves a continual even disturbance of air molecules above 20 times a second and you'll create a tone. Let's say for example you train your calf muscles extremely hard and as a result can do 440 calf raises in a single second. As you increase your speed above 20 calf raises a second, you'll begin to hear a tone that equals the amount of calf raises you've done in that second. Do 440 calf raises a second and you'll hear a frequency that equals 440 Hz beside your ear. Why do you need to do above 20 calf raises a second? Because we can't hear tones below roughly 20 Hz. Your head acts in this way in the same way as a guitar string, moving air molecules back and forth at a continual frequency, thus creating sound waves that are interpreted as a tone. You could even use mayonnaise as an instrument by simply waving it back and forth at a continuous rate really fast, which again would create a tone. Of course, that's literally impossible to do, but you could. If all music really is time, then why do different instruments sound different? The quality of a sound is called timbre, and is the result of instruments not only producing the fundamental tone, which is the one you hear, but also frequencies that are in relation to it, called overtones. Different instruments will vibrate at a main frequency, like 440 Hz, but also produce a series of quieter tones that act in mathematical relation to it. The more overtones you have, the more the tone changes in timbre. This effect can be presented more clearly when synthesized artificially. This is a frequency spectrum graph, which plots the loudness of a tone against its frequency. This is a pure sine wave tone, which has no overtones whatsoever, and as a result sounds really soft and nice. Here's the fundamental tone. As you start to add more overtones, the quality starts to change. Different ratios of overtones in relation to the fundamental tone will make completely different sounding timbres. Without going into any more scientific jargon, the reason why different instruments sound different is because often vibrating elements within those instruments will vibrate at the main frequency, but also vibrate in different areas at frequencies that are in relation to the main frequency. The qualities of sound coming from an instrument is just another value of time, as timbre is simply the result of a vibrating element vibrating in such a way as to create smaller vibrations that act in relation to the main vibration or main tone. Our brain simply interprets this as changing the quality of the sound. Even rhythm requires interpretation from our brain. To understand timing, the brain uses areas such as the frontal cortex, the parietal cortex, the basal ganglia, and the cerebellum. A really interesting study suggests that in order for the brain to perceive time, it uses its own neural oscillations of around 100 Hz as a reference to compare to other rhythms. A sort of internal clock, not to be confused with the circadian rhythm, which is the one we use to regulate our sleep. Music is not something that exists in the real world where things are measurable, but is instead created in our own minds. Music isn't inherently real in the sense that it exists as a physical thing, but the effects and physical phenomenon that enable us to perceive and interpret it are.